Welcome to our workshop. We're delighted to have you. My name is Ndidi Okonkwo. I'm a visiting scholar at the Max Bell School at McGill, and delighted to have this opportunity to engage with you in this conversation on creating enabling policies for small businesses, lessons from Africa. We're going to give a few more minutes for others to join our conversation. We're excited to have a lot of interest in this topic, and I'm especially grateful to my dynamic guests for staying up into the evening hours and giving us their evening. I think it's probably 8 p.m. or 7 p.m. in Nigeria, and it's both Adron and Toki are in Nigeria. So let's just give a few minutes for others to join and we'll dive right in. Welcome again. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce our dynamic speakers and then the topic. I picked this topic as part of my workshop series as a visiting scholar at Max Bell because I really believe small businesses are pivotal for any economy to develop. Small businesses drive innovation, growth, biggest sources of employment, and are so pivotal to many, many sectors. In parts of the world, over 80% of the GDP of economies is contributed by small businesses. But they struggle. They struggle with shaping policy. While large companies typically have teams that are focused on advocacy and lobbying governments to ensure their interests are advanced and protected, most small businesses do not have the funds or the staff to do the same. So this session will feature two experts from Kenya and Nigeria who will share their experiences in building the skills of entrepreneurs and supportive infrastructure to shape micro and macroeconomic and financial and sector policies that positively influence their ecosystem. And we're really going to be talking about practical ways to amplify the voices of small businesses and shape policy, even in hostile environments. I'm honored to welcome Adron, who is an international legal specialist. She's a non-resident international legal specialist with the New Markets Lab based in Uganda. Her prior legal experience includes intellectual property, the environment, energy, human rights, and health. Her work at the New Markets Lab is focused on a number of aspects of international law and development, including agricultural law and regulation, land tenure, financial services, and legal issues impacting emerging businesses. She's a Ugandan lawyer who holds a master's in law degree from Harvard Law School and a Bachelor of Law from Makerere University in Kampala, Uganda. Welcome, Adrian. We're so honored to have you. And then we have Toki Mabogunje. I've known Auntie Toki for many, many, many years. She's a force to be reckoned with in the Nigerian business landscape. She's a Nigerian lawyer as well, broadcaster, poet, and business consultant. She's the third female president of the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry and the founder of Toki Mabogunje & Co. Toki is a member of the Governing Council of the World Chamber of Federation. She graduated with a law degree from the University of Ife, now Obafemi Awolowo University. She earned her LLM in International Business Law from the University of Exeter, England. She was honored in 2014 as the Personality of the Year of the World Theatre Day and Cultural Ambassador. And she has worked with SMEs for as long as I've worked with SMEs. I met her when I first moved back to Nigeria in 2000 to help start the Fate Foundation. And then she was already shaping SME engagement and policy and strengthening SMEs through different programs through the World Bank, the IFC, and other organizations. And I was at her investiture when she was elected as the chairman of the Lagos Chamber. And I was so proud to see how she single-handedly shaped the chamber, amplified the voices of women, and continues to serve as a positive role model. She happens to be a grandma as well. So she doesn't look it, but she's lived many lives. So thank you to these two dynamic women for joining us today and for sharing their wealth of experiences. The format and the run of show is that we're going to have each of them present for about 15 to 20 minutes. I'll take a few questions after their presentations, and then we'll open it up to questions from the audience. I'm also going to request that, this is being recorded. So when you do pose your questions, please type them into the chat. Be cognizant of others on the group. There's also going to be a caption for those who have any physical challenges with engaging. And we want to make it as lively and as interactive as possible. So definitely use the chat box, engage. If there's something that's coming out that sounds exciting, please tweet about it as well. And we'll make sure that we amplify this even after the event. So without further ado, I would like to ask Auntie Toki to please start us off with your presentation. Welcome again.
Thank you so much, Ndidi. Can I confirm that everyone can see my slides?
That's correct. Thank you.
Oh, you can. Okay. Thank you so much. And thank you so much for the invitation to be here. I'm honored to be here. SME development and SME contributions to the development of any nation has always been my passion, and has been a place that I have been very active in for the last 22 years. I start off with a couple of simple definitions around the topic. First of all, saying to us that, you know, SMEs are really essential to the development of the world economy. They provide products and services. They create value in the economy. They also provide employment. They develop employee skills, and they create wealth for nations around the world. Some indices from the World Bank actually shows us that SMEs in developing countries represent about 90% of businesses, and they provide 50% of employment worldwide. However, formal SMEs contribute about 40% to national GDP. That having been said, we see that SMEs are truly essential. And if SMEs are so essential to the development of any economy, then it's absolutely essential that we're able to build the skills of SME leaders to shape economic and financial policy so that they shape the business environment. And when we speak about business environment, what are we speaking about? We're speaking about things that affect the cost of business. And I just have a few examples here. So we talk about legislative and regulatory frameworks and their enforcement, government policy, access to finance, protection of intellectual property, availability of skilled labor, taxation, customs procedures, contract enforcement, infrastructure, land ownership, security of life and property, etc. Now, if SMEs want to be able to affect public policy and do it effectively, they really can't do it individually and as isolated entities. They really need to band together and do it collectively. And so usually you find that business member organizations such as chambers of commerce, the manufacturers associations, other business associations, trade organizations, NGOs, they all engage in advocacy as the effective means of affecting policy reform. So when we say advocacy, what are we talking about? There's no one definition, but it's a number of things. I have 4 of them here. So one, it's really a set of targeted actions that's directed at decision makers about a specific issue. It's the approach of influencing and attempting to influence the way that someone else thinks about an issue. It's action that's directed at changing policies, positions, and programs for any type of institution. And also it's putting a problem on the agenda, its solution, the solution to that problem, and building support for acting on both the problem and the solution. And so when we look at this sector of SMEs and we look at the fact that they need to act effectively, and that one of the most effective tools for affecting the business environment and for policy reform is advocacy. This advocacy has got to be effective. And to be effective, one, it requires vision of your desired outcomes. It actually desires a thorough understanding of the issue at hand, the ability to prepare evidence-based policy proposals, also to create opportunities to meet and persuade policymakers and implementers either to take or not to take action or to do things differently. However, in the process of rolling out advocacy programs and advocacy campaigns, there are some limitations to what SMEs are able to provide. And this is why the topic today is about how to build the skills of these SME leaders. Because the approach they need to have needs to be comprehensive, it needs to be integrated, they need to be able to measure, have measurable objectives, have plans and budgets, and also have M&E, which is an area that we seem to be very weak on in our environment, for tracking progress and adjusting to changing conditions. They do need to build these skills. And luckily I have an example of an organization, an international development agency set up by UK Aid that had documented some of their experiences in Nigeria, where they documented some of the limitations that they came across over their, I think, almost 10-year stay in the country. And here are some of them. Sometimes really because the sector is beset with a plethora of problems, they tend to take on too many issues at once. They find it difficult to prioritize which ones to handle first. It's not always a very inclusive process, and so there's a limited role for members to play in this process. There's a dearth, there's a gap where strategies and work plans are concerned. Interestingly enough, sometimes the issue they wish to advocate on, there isn't quite a good understanding about it, and they lack evidence around how that issue affects them, as well as the technical competence of dealing with that issue. Secretariats tend to be very poorly staffed, very low capacity, not enough resources to be able to address the whole issue around advocating for the matter, because sometimes the SME organizations will look at it as a one-off event, or maybe a string of 2 or 3, and it might end up taking 3, 4, 5, 6, and sometimes 10 years to make that change take place. There's a lack of internal readiness. So because they're hamstrung by the lack of resources, there's always the complaint around, well, we don't have the money to hire an advocacy officer who can focus on this for us. Sometimes there isn't enough commitment by members of the organization for them to put an advocacy committee together, because they need to have medium to long-term commitment to that issue. Also, there's an underrating of the value of the media to pushing on that agenda. Networking and coordination might be spotty. And then, of course, the whole idea around having a position paper that actually says to the policymakers, it gives them the reasons behind why that issue needs to be addressed. So what are these skills that our SME leaders, what are we talking about here today? First of all, there's the fact that the advocacy plan is critical, and that these SME leaders, these organizations sometimes just plan an event and think that with that 1 or 2 or 3 events, they will get to where they're going. The plan helps them with achieving success. I had mentioned before about the plethora of problems, and so they have a problem prioritizing. Advocacy must always be based on evidence. So research is critical to pushing an advocacy agenda. And these organizations must be able to put a policy paper together, which they will present to stakeholders around why action must be taken around the issues that have been raised. They must be able to advocate for change amongst stakeholders, and they must be able to follow through and follow up on these actions. So what are some of the frameworks that they could use for some of this? And I intend to speak more to these when we get to the question and answer sessions. But here are some examples that I've been involved in. There's one approach called the National Business Agenda, which was introduced by the Center for International Private Enterprise, SIPE, based in Washington, DC. In Africa in particular, it's been used in Nigeria, Egypt, Tanzania, Kenya, and Malawi. You have the Business Environment Roundtables, the BERs as we call them. Those were used at the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry by Enable that I had spoken about earlier. We have the regulatory conversations that's been done by a wholly Nigerian NGO called the Convention on Business Integrity, where regulatory conversations are had with regulators in order to have a much closer conversation around the change that has to take place or the reforms we have to have around policy. And my final example has to do with creating business coalitions, which really has been a really interesting experience for me. I've dealt with coalitions of over 30 organizations coming together to run a regional agenda around policy reform. Thank you. That was just a quick summary around what we have to talk about today. Thank you very much, Ndidi. Back to you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Lots of rich insights, and you did it in record time. I have so many questions. I'm sure that others do too. I want to just touch on two, and then we'll hear from Adron, then we'll come back and have both of you engage in questions. As you were speaking, I was thinking, my gosh, you know, the issues are real. The lack of funding to invest in M&E, to invest in research, position papers, the lack of trust. Many people don't want to form coalitions. They say that their interests will be drowned out by the bigger fish. There's a lot of mistrust because even when you come to the coalitions, meetings happen after the coalitions, and some people have more social capital than others. And I'm just curious, from your experience, can you talk about one concrete example where SMEs were able to shape policy and overcome some of these many, many barriers that are so real, where they saw a problem and through their common interventions, things were able to change?
All right, so one of my best examples is a coalition that was created in Eastern Nigeria, in Enugu in particular, called ECOBA. And that was a particularly interesting experiment because it was professional associations and business associations. Now, the first thing that came across was professionals are used to providing service and not partnering or collaborating with business people. So we first of all had to get over that hurdle. I know it took us about a year to get them to coalesce. And we had everyone from bankers, chartered accountants, lawyers, engineers, relating with market traders and other business associations. The mistrust was there, but when we had their leaders together and we had these various meetings and workshops around how best to run the advocacy program, they then began to see that they actually did have some issues that were common across board. And then they identified them. So there was security, that was one big issue at the time. There was taxation, that was another huge issue at the time. There was petroleum distribution, that was another huge issue across the time. So they were able to identify 4 of those issues. Prioritizing was difficult, right? So we had them have several meetings with one another, and eventually they decided on tax. Once they decided on tax, we had them sit and identify who the stakeholders were. Who are the policymakers? Who are the regulators you need to talk to? And for them to arrange to have a tax forum where they had everyone in there, from the legislators to the director of tax for the state, to the local government levy collectors, everyone was in the room. And this conversation led to the director of tax for the state realizing that, one, the tax office wasn't communicating enough. And so they started running TV and radio ads around what were legitimate taxes Two, they started printing flyers and sending out communication across social media about the importance of paying tax and what tax was used for. The director of tax also, for the first time, started to have meetings with these various associations on a one-on-one basis, because they all had a different coloration, they all had a different issue. And once he thought he had a good understanding, he brought all that together, met with the legislators, because they were in the process, coincidentally, of amending the tax laws. And so they had the stakeholders from the coalition come into the legislature on a particular day and make their case. They sat down, had a position paper, at the end of which the legislature then created a desk for the coalition so they could sit in on public hearings. So they'd have an opportunity to give voice to their position in the whole matter. With the market, that's all informal. So it was a bit different. And what the director of tax did there was he negotiated with these taxpayers that he was looking to put in the net. A lot of those traders did not pay tax because they were in the formal sector. They were not captured in anybody's data. And so with the negotiation, the leaders then agreed with the director of tax that if he agreed not to be so arbitrary in raising taxes over the next 5 years, and they would keep it at a certain rate, they would ensure that their members paid these taxes. I went back 2 years later to do some evaluation to hear the director of tax tell me that tax went up in the state by 400%. And for the beneficiaries, those who paid, to say that they were able to get the attention of the state governor whenever they needed things to be done, either in the market or for the association. There was closer communication, and there was much more of an opportunity to have conversations around issues to do with tax.
That's a great story. 400% increase in taxes is music to any policymaker's ears. And to hear that the entrepreneurs saw the benefit of paying taxes is wonderful, because you rarely hear that in our context. And it's even more special because I'm from Enugu. I was born in Enugu, and my parents still live in Enugu.
That's why I chose that story.
What a great story. You knew. What a great story. Another question for you, Toki, and this is something that has come up in my research, is the whole concept of social capital and who has it and who doesn't. And I know you alluded to this in this story when you talked about the traders. Oftentimes you find out that those small businesses that are able to shape policy or have a voice are, individuals who are educated, who live in the cities, or have some type of privilege. At least they have more of a voice and power than others who are excluded. How have you seen opportunities to bridge that gap where these inequities exist? In our context, obviously, there's the gender inequity, there's also ethnic and income inequity. How have you seen the ability of small businesses to bridge those gaps? And where have you seen the use of media? Media is a very powerful tool, but it's also very dangerous in our context, because there can be some backlash and you can be punished. So can you walk me through two of those examples as well, if you have them?
Okay, so that's a very difficult question, obviously, because we're still battling with those challenges on a daily basis. But I do have an example of that, and it's an NGO called the ANWBN. It's an association of women businesses that when they were first formed, and also that was instigated by the Center for International Private Enterprise. They were a coalition of 35 associations. Today, they're 52. And these women were looking at how to close the gender gap and some of the challenges that they faced in business. And so they had a whole list of what those inequities were, some of which were things like women are not allowed to own property. Women cannot buy land. Women have no access to finance because they can't provide collateral. The banks continue to insist on this collateral. women don't seem to be able to get a foot in edgeways when it comes to legislation that concerns women and all of this. So they designed or planned an advocacy campaign called, which was titled something like Access to Capital for Small Businesses Owned by Women. And this necessarily took us to regulators like the Central Bank of Nigeria, the Association of Microfinance Banks of Nigeria, the Committee for Women in Senate and also in the House. We also spoke with a number of other women organizations. We carried out surveys with women on what they thought their barriers were. We met with a number of NGOs that worked in the sector. The net was thrown quite wide. And the interesting results were, one, by talking to the legislators, the women discovered that there's actually no law in Nigeria that stops a woman from owning property or buying land. And that these were all social and cultural prejudices that they aren't able to deal with. And that we would have to come up with some other kind of plan to handle those kinds of issues within the context that they are created. So in different parts of the country, there are different issues one needs to deal with. It also came to light that, which was also interesting, that most women are risk averse and very shy of borrowing. And so when we did the survey, 55% of the women, the businesswomen we surveyed, had never asked for a loan. And I got interesting responses like, well, my mom told me never to borrow money, and that sort of thing. And so we found that for those who did borrow money and who actually had records in place, it took them a while to get the loans, but they did get the loans in the first place. When we spoke with the central bank had the experience of being a regulator and actually having policy with our commercial banks and saying to them that 60% of the SME fund that they had created as an intervention fund should go to women-owned businesses or women-managed businesses, and that the banks were not taking that up. When we spoke with the banks were saying, well, women are very risky because they don't have collateral. And it was all of this discussion that eventually led to some policy reform where the Nigerian government has actually passed what they call a movable collateral registry. So now you can borrow with your jewelry, with your car, and it doesn't have to be fixed assets. But as I speak with you now, the banks still are not engaging with that policy. So there's still a challenge there. The biggest lessons there for the women were that a lot of the issues that were put on the table around the gender gap had to do with assumptions that had been made, and that a lot of research really needs to be carried out when we want to deal with the sort of issues you're talking about. A different approach has to be taken because then you have to involve these other players such as traditional holders, communities, religious leaders, those kinds of people who actually shape social and cultural behavior. It's interesting. It's work in progress, Ndidi. What can I say?
Thank you so much. Fantastic response. Lots of rich examples, and we'll definitely be coming back to you. I'm going to encourage our audience to please put your questions and comments in the chat. We're so happy to see some of the leaders in the Max Bell School. Thank you for joining us. Some of our professors, thank you for joining us. And the students as well. Delighted that you've joined us on this great conversation with these amazing women. I'm going to move swiftly to Adron. She's going to share her presentation. And I want to thank Adron again for joining us. To find Adron was a very interesting journey. I first reached out to Andy, which is an association of small business engaged practitioners, funders around the world. They connected me to her organization, and then I found her. She came highly recommended, and only to discover she also has the Harvard connection, Harvard Law. And I was at the business school, so we're going to have to trade which years we were there, but I think I'm a little older. So, Adron, without further ado, thank you so much for joining us, and please give us your presentation.
Thank you, Ndidi. And of course, it's a pleasure to be here today. My presentation is going to be around agriculture because my organization is specialized in focusing on policy and laws and regulations for agricultural businesses. So I'll talk about our experiences and how we are involved, or how I'm directly involved in creating an enabling environment for policy, for better policy for small businesses, but mostly focused on agri-businesses. Please go to the next slide. So our focus on agriculture policy, law and regulation is mainly because of my background. My family is involved in agriculture, and before I did my master's, I didn't even know that there was something, there's a big framework of laws that's just focused on agriculture or seed or fertilizer. But over the years, I've worked in over 20 countries in sub-Saharan Africa, just focusing on regulations that impact agribusinesses and creating opportunities for a better enabling environment through which they can operate. The agricultural sector alone in sub-Saharan Africa employs over 70% of the population, according to the IFC. And 25% of the GDP in most sub-Saharan African countries comes from the agricultural sector. So we know that this is an industry that is quite important. And of course, as we look at the sector, there are different laws and regulations that impact it. These range from business registration rules, access to agricultural finance, and of course there is finance, access to finance in its own, but there's also specific attention to agricultural finance, because agriculture as a sector is usually considered as being highly risky. So financial institutions usually do not want to go there, even where there are specific rules of a percentage, say, of loans or financial services going to agriculture as a sector. That usually is not the case. And there are other laws that impact the growth of the industry, of the agriculture, of the agricultural businesses, including rules on sanitary and phytosanitary measures, because agriculture mostly deals in food. So of course there are laws on specific standards that have to be complied with. And small businesses usually do not have the capacity to meet these standards. And that can be problematic because then it hinders them from reaching the market. Then you have different rules on licenses and obtaining permits for marketing and distribution of agriculture-related products. These processes can be unnecessarily long, or they can involve so many laws that it becomes quite hard for a small business that maybe does not have legal support to navigate these requirements. And then there can usually be complicated rules on import or export. So you'll find that most SMEs will operate within within the communities, or will normally not explore the opportunity, say, to export because of usually complicated rules, but also the capacity to do so. Then you have issues to do with taxes, issues to do with rules on employment, have issues to do with contracts. Most of them will engage in contracts where they do not exactly get to benefit, maybe because of the terms of the contracts they enter into. And licensing capacity in that case can be a problem. I mean, and contracting capacity can be a problem. And other rules, the general value chain involved in the agriculture sector is highly regulated. And without particular flexibilities for small agribusinesses, it's most likely that they will not survive. Please go to the next slide. So this is some of what I've mentioned, that there are usually very complicated rules that these agribusinesses have to navigate. And without the proper direction or without the proper legal support, they'll either not be able to comply, or most of them will stay in the informal sector. So in most of the countries we've operated in, Kenya, Uganda, Malawi, Nigeria, Tanzania, most of agribusinesses are in the informal sector, because it's not easy to get into the formal sector because of complicated rules on business registration, on requirements with standards. These can be particularly hard for small businesses, for small agribusinesses to comply with. So in most areas where these laws are complicated, then it can be particularly hard. Most of them will stay in the informal sector, and that means that they will not be able to benefit from, say, the advantages of formalizing. They will not be able to bid for certain contracts or get protection from the laws. So this is particularly a challenge, and we've been able to work on how we could be able to address some of these by advocating for flexibilities in certain laws, or creating legal tools that can be used to build capacity for the different stakeholders. Please go to the next slide. So this is one of the maps that this is one of the tools that we use to map out the different laws, say, related to the seed regulatory value chain. These are so many laws that for a single agribusiness to map it out, it will not be able to. There are laws that exist at the national level, there are laws that exist at the regional level, at the international level, and of course, all of them impact how agribusinesses operate at the national and regional levels. It will not be possible for most of them to navigate these systems. So it means that for them, the only option, or the only easiest option, is to stay in the informal sector, where they're not recognized, where they don't get the benefits of, say, accessing finance, or because they usually be required to provide a certificate of incorporation, or where they will have challenges to bid for good contracts where they could be able to perform, but they do not comply with the regulations because they're still in the informal sector. So this is one of the examples that I wanted to give regarding, say, if you are in the seed trade business, how many laws are you looking at navigating? And if you're a small business, do you really have the capacity to navigate them? Or does it mean that the only option you have is to operate on the in the informal sector? What does that mean for you as a small business? Please go to the next slide. So then I'll talk about what New Markets Lab, or what we have been doing to create enabling policies for small businesses. New Markets Lab is an international law and development center that is focusing on leveraging law and regulation to create a sustainable to create an enabling environment for trade, both at the national and regional levels. We've developed a set of legal and regulatory tools, and one of those we have are called regulatory systems maps. These are maps that set out the entire process relating to a particular area. So for instance, if you need to get a license to sell seed in Ethiopia, what do you need to do? Where do you apply? How long does the process take? How much will it cost? Where is the system different in practice than it is in the laws, and how can you navigate that? So as New Markets Lab and as part of the team, we've been developing these regulatory systems maps relating to different processes and in different countries. We've mapped out these processes, for instance, on sea trade in about 20 countries in sub-Saharan Africa, and some of these maps have been adopted by regulatory institutions. And of course, I'll introduce this on the next slide. The other thing that we've been working on is the case studies. These dive into conducting no, please go back to the, with the case studies, we look at, we conduct research to find out where the gaps are, so that we can have concrete evidence that we provide to the policymakers to say, from the research, from conducting stakeholder consultations, from understanding what is in the market, we've realized that the gaps are here. The gaps can be responded to or addressed in this manner. So in this way, we've been able to present concrete evidence based on research, based on stakeholder consultations, based on data, presenting it to the policymakers to, and also using that research to identify where the gaps are and providing options on how they could be addressed. We've done these case studies on different topics in different countries, on seed, on fertilizer, on pesticide. In Tanzania, we looked at cosmetics. In Kenya, we've been looking at vegetable seed, and we've been able to identify different gaps, and we've also been able to engage with policymakers together with the relevant associations. So for instance, in Kenya, there is the Seed Traders Association of Kenya. Right now, we are working on a case study with the National Potato Farmers Federation to address, I don't know whether you've heard about this, but last year, there was a boycott of potatoes that were imported from South Africa to be used by KFC in Kenya. And the market was saying, we have potatoes here, why are you importing them from South Africa? So there was a drive by the market to say, let's boycott KFC until they buy things from our market, from the local market. So we are currently conducting a case study into this to see where are the gaps, what can we recommend to the policymakers, because there is definitely a demand from the market. Something has to be done. And because there's already that interest driving this research, it helps us, to be able to talk to the stakeholders, to identify where the gaps are, and to make recommendations on what can be done by the regulators. We also conducted, we've done so many case studies. I'm trying to think about what was the most relevant. Maybe all of them have been. Maybe another example is the one we did on agricultural finance in Uganda, and this resulted into developing regulations on microinsurance and microfinance, and these did not exist before because the agricultural, and then there is also a proposition to develop the policy on agricultural finance, which did not exist before, meaning that it wasn't a priority for the government before. And of course, since the policy creates, gives direction as to what is driving the government, then it shows that having the agricultural policy in place means that agricultural finance is now going to be given priority. But these case studies, of course, have resulted into different policy and legal changes in different countries. Next slide, please. So this is one of the examples of the regulatory systems maps that we've been developing. It maps out the entire process from beginning to the end and highlighting where the gaps are in practice and showing where interventions can be done. So for instance, where do you apply if you want a certificate of competence? A certificate of competence is it's like a permit that allows you to trade in seed in Ethiopia. Others call it license, but Ethiopia calls it a certificate of competence. These regulatory systems maps that we've developed, this is one of them that shows you how do you get a certificate of competence? Where do you apply? How much do you pay? How long is the process? So, and the Ministry of Agriculture has agreed to adopt these maps so that they can guide the different stakeholders in the agricultural, in the seed business, to show them the processes that they could follow. Next step, please. Next slide, please. So I wanted to show a bit of methodology of what we use in our advocacy work. No, the one before. In our advocacy work, part of what we do is, maybe what to say that the most important part is that we engage the stakeholders. Sometimes engage them individually, or we do so through their associations, or we do both. So for instance, in Ethiopia, while we were mapping out the regulatory system for seed trade, we reviewed all the laws, current and proposed, and then we were able to conduct consultations with the stakeholders to understand their experiences from navigating the market. Where do they find the challenges? Where is the practice different from what the laws say? And then we were able to develop these maps. And then after we validated these maps with the regulators and the policy makers and the industry, so then we're able to show from the research, these were the findings. We have where the practice is different. We have where there are gaps in the legal framework. We have where there are no flexibilities for, say, small businesses, which will make them harder to join the market. Or we have where the laws are so stringent that they basically are made to drive out the small agricultural businesses. So this was part of the methodology we used. But part of what I wanted to highlight is that the stakeholders, or the people who are going to use the regulatory system, have to be involved in this process. Next slide, please. So the other tools that we've used in the advocacy has been the legal guides. So we developed, for instance, we have the East African legal guide for entrepreneurs that is guiding entrepreneurs on how they can navigate different legal issues. So for instance, land ownership. What is the process of land ownership? What is the process of getting a lease? What is the process of registering a business? How do you pay taxes? And this legal guide is for all the East African countries. So Burundi, Rwanda, Uganda, Kenya, Tanzania, and Southern Sudan. And this has been used by different stakeholders, including Ndidi, which is this coalition of entrepreneurs around the world. And we've been able to develop other manuals, say on seed registration within regional economic communities such as COMESA and SADC, and we've been able to launch them in different platforms. So for instance, during the African Seed Traders Association in 2019 and 2020, and now next week, there is the 2022 Congress, where I'll be presenting another manual that is showing how these laws have been operating in practice, where the gaps, what can be done by the regulators, and this being the African Seed Traders Association, all the key stakeholders are there. Regulators, seed companies, farmers. So this would be a good platform for us to present such findings. And then we've also had what we call test cases, where we show how regulatory systems are operating in practice. And through this, we've been able to facilitate the registration of several seed varieties in the different regional economic communities, seed catalogs. And then we've also been engaged in developing annotated rules and agreements. And we also have awareness and legal capacity building workshops. It's actually part of the reason that I'm in Abuja right now, because I'm going to be facilitating a workshop on licensing, where we get agricultural technologies from the hands of the public sector into the seed companies, the small seed companies, which can then get to drive them to the farmers. So everything is, we get to do we have different approaches, but these are some of the things, some of the ways we've been able to ensure that enabling policies are created for small businesses through building their capacity so that their voices can be heard, and also training them and creating guides to improve their information and other initiatives. Next slide, please. The tool on model annotated rules and agreements have been part of drafting different laws for different countries and regional economic communities that have, and in all these processes, we've made sure that stakeholders are engaged, that agri-SMEs' interests are represented, so that we don't have rules with inflexible requirements that make it harder for either agribusinesses to enter into certain businesses or to stay there. So we've, for instance, engaged in drafting a law on fertilizer in Malawi, a law on plant variety protection in Uganda, contract farming in Ethiopia. We've advised the East African community on developing seeds and plant varieties bill that is now at advanced stages of approval or enactment. The East African Community Fertilizer Policy and bill. We are currently working with FAO and SADC to develop a regional framework for fertilizer. And we've done these works in so many other countries. But what is key maybe is to note that we make sure that stakeholders' voices, especially agri-SMEs, are heard in the process so that they are represented in this body of works. We get to engage them through the different associations, or we get to talk to them directly. So usually we can talk to them, or we can do both. Please go to the next slide. Yes, so that is about it. And thank you.
Thank you so much, Adron, for that fantastic presentation. Agriculture is near and dear to my heart, and I love the systematic approach you have to addressing these issues. I love the regulatory maps. A lot of the things that Auntie Toki talked about, you actually are formally executing through a systematic process and documenting, which is so powerful. And we applaud you and your team for the work that you're doing and for the impact you're making across the continent. So well done. I have a few follow-on questions, and I'm going to ask our participants to also type in questions into the chat box. You know, Adron, as you were talking, the skeptic in me was saying, wow, Adron gets to do all this work because it's funded by international organizations. And of course, we're not going to happy that this work is being done. It's important work, but how do you ensure local ownership and sustainability beyond the donor funding, especially for some of these key policy transformations that take years, sometimes 10 years, sometimes 2 years? How do you ensure that local ownership? And then the second question, you can address both, is as we think about some of the transformation required, there's a lot of pushback in the Nigerian context when we talk about seed law and reform, with many people saying, oh, we're just pushing a GMO agenda, you're pushing the agenda of the West, you're supporting international seed companies at the risk of local seed companies. How do you manage that divide?
So I'll first respond to the first one about local ownership. So one of the things that we've been trying to do is to ensure that in our capacity building works, there is training for at least one local lawyer so that they can keep the work running. So for instance, in Kenya, the Kenya Agricultural and Livestock Cairo is the National Research Institute. At first there was a project that funded having a local lawyer within Cairo so that they can help them with licensing and dealing with the legal kind of part of things. And then after the project ended, everyone was asking, how are they going to continue to pay for this lawyer? But then it turns out that for the 3 years that the lawyer had been in the institution, the licensing, which was part of her training, was able to bring in royalties. So there was enough money. There was money within Cairo to actually cover her salary, and that has continued to be the case. So part of what we do is capacity training, but also the other thing with having local ownership is that we engage the stakeholders throughout the entire process. We make sure that what is presented is not our ideas or interests. There is usually a way of saying, oh, we've seen best practices elsewhere, but then it turns out that those best practices may not necessarily work for this country X. So we've had a lot of stakeholder engagement, and it does not stop when the project ends. It even continues on just by NML. And then the other issue maybe to mention is that we've now developed a platform, a digital platform that is going to house all these regulatory systems maps. Now, the national systems are going to be linked to this platform. So if, for instance, you want to know how to get an export permit in Kenya, you click on KRA or on KEFIS, which is the National Regulatory Institution for Seed and agricultural inputs. If you click on their website, you'll be able to link to this platform. So all this information is available to you. So that's the way of sustaining it. That's the way of keeping it running, even as the projects run out. Now, the issue about GMOs and GMOs and the agenda of the West, like these are things that we've had in so many countries, In Uganda last year, I was the consultant to develop the plant variety protection regulations. And these are some of the questions they were saying. Why are you protecting these varieties? Why are you taking them away from the farmers? What will we eat if you say that every seed that we have to plant, we have to buy? What about our seed that has been here for years through our grandparents? Why are you taking it away? But there's mostly a misunderstanding of how the laws will operate or what the laws mean, or there's usually a misunderstanding. And this is partly why we do the capacity building workshops, or why we do these workshops, to say, this is what the law says. Do you have an objection to it? If you have an objection to it, why do you have that objection? After understanding clearly what the law is saying, because usually it's someone who starts saying, they're bringing the GMOs. And then before research, before understanding what the law is saying, it just spreads. And before you know it, it's out of control. One of the issues that was raised in Uganda as we were developing the plant variety protection regulations is that the laws were taking the seed away from the farmers, that now they are going to have to buy it every time. And we say that's not the case, because in the law itself, there is an exception to say if the seed is by a farmer on their farm, they can do with it as they please. They can save it for the next season. They can trade it with a fellow farmer. And that mostly, some of the statements mostly arise from misunderstanding or the lack of information. This is why we have the workshops, and this is why we conduct the research and be able, even some of them, I can't say they are completely baseless. Some of them have sense in them. So this is where we do more research and be able to present to the policymakers to say, this is what the industry is saying. This is where the changes have to be made. And of course, it's true that where most of the research is donor-based, there are limitations to that. There is no denial in that. But we can't also say that positive work can be done as long as the funding is running.
Well, thank you so much. Very clear responses. I'm going to encourage our audience to please send in your questions and comments in the chats, because we'll take them. I have a question for both of you. Both of you are lawyers. When I invited you, I actually did not realize both of you were lawyers. Is it only lawyers that can change policy or work on policy? Can you bust that myth? Let's start with you, Adron.
It also turns out that we also have a background in economics, because I also went to the Harvard Business School. So I think both of them mix each other really well. We need someone who understands the laws, but we also need it to be supported by empirical evidence, because one of the things that I've realized is policymakers want numbers. They don't want to read reports. They're not going to read like 80 pages of explanations. Give them a number and say, this is, if you don't do this, it will probably result into this. Your constituent is going to starve, or you lose votes if this does not happen. That is the language they understand. Evidence, support it with empirical evidence, and just create a case. The other thing I've realized is that when you're talking to politicians, you kind of talk to them differently, because I feel like they understand a completely different language of votes and implications, and I don't know, but I always find it fascinating. It's not the same way you talk to, say, it's different. It's different.
Very, very interesting. And this is why I'm so glad the Max Bell School is doing this, because the policy dimension, the economic dimension are critical to shaping our ecosystems and our economies. And we have to be able to speak both languages.
Right.
Yes, Toki, what do you have? What's your response to this question about the legal background that's critical to shaping policy?
I think law lends itself to a lot of things. Which is why I find myself in business development. But I absolutely agree with Adron that, the economists and the lawyers, you really can't have a group dealing with this without having those two. But the technical experts are also very important as well, because I think the technical experts also give a coloration to the policy. You really have to understand the technicalities of the issue that you're dealing with to be able to formulate what works. And all of that. So I think technical experts as well. But yeah, law just lends itself to, even to politics, Adron. The lawyers are also politicians.
Yes. So we're starting to see the questions come in. The first question from Raphael is directed at Toki, and he says, I have a question. If you could foresee the role of youth and young people in the items you highlighted, what's the role of young people and youth as we think about shaping policy in our context? Can you take that first question, please?
Yes, thank you very much. It's an area that I just started delving in maybe about 10 years ago, when we really started to focus on youth in terms of policy formulation and the fact that they are a very important stakeholder, whatever we choose to do. And I think that they really have to be part of the conversation, because whatever it is we're discussing involves the youth. Africa has a youth bulge. Nigeria has a youth bulge. There's nothing we're going to be planning or discussing or wanting to implement that does not involve these youth. And they are not bogged down by history and has-beens and what was. I find that the way that they approach issues pretty much has to do with, and I don't know whether it's the millennials per se, it really has to do with, look, what's the issue at hand and what's the local solution to this? That I like. What is the local solution to this? What are the things that we can do and bring to bear on this issue that will take us forward? I think it's absolutely critical that they're in. In fact, the two things I've always said in the last 22 years is that if you're having a conversation and women are not in that conversation and the youth are not in that conversation is going nowhere.
Right. That's right.
Yes, so, and you brought up the question on women, which is another question in the chat, but can you take Adron, can you take the youth and women issue together? We have a lot of young people on this platform. Obviously, Max Bell has a master's degree program in public policy, and young people and women want to have a voice in shaping the ecosystems in the countries that they're from. How would you recommend they get involved? What are some tools that they can utilize to shape policy, to amplify their voices, and to ensure a future for themselves in their context.
I definitely agree with Toki that if you do not talk to women or the youth, it's especially in the agricultural sector, we've realized that most of the businesses in the agricultural sector, most of the informal businesses in the agricultural sector are by women. And most of them that are non-formalized are still by women. For some of the research that we conducted in Kenya, I think last year, around about the vegetable industry, most youth were interested in this kind of business because they're like, it's short term. We get money in about a month or 2 months. We would like to engage, but they're also concerned about resources, about the capacity. Most of them do not own land, and they're looking for a way out. So the policy part of things has to address how to integrate these two groups, because they want to be involved, but usually they are limited by history, by different issues, but mostly finance, resources. In our work, we've also noticed that the youth especially are coming up with new ways of engaging or involving themselves, especially by using technology. There are different apps that we've been able, there are so many hubs, digital hubs that are being spearheaded by the youth. There are so many apps that I've seen in agriculture. They're all developed by these young people. There's this young gentleman who developed an app where you could place your phone on the soil and it tells you the pH in it and which kind of nutrients are needed. And I was like, oh, wow, that's amazing. So there's always a way to involve themselves, but there has to be a way for the policy to make sure that they are engaged in some way, because it's important.
Terrific. It's interesting because, as I was hearing you talk, I was thinking about social media. And I asked Toki that question earlier. Social media is a tool young people are using across the world. In Africa, more than ever before, we've seen the power of social media. But it can also be a dangerous tool. There's been backlash, as we've seen in the case of Nigeria with the shutdown of Twitter for almost 4 or 5 months. How do we navigate using social media to raise voices, amplify voices, build awareness about issues, and then how do we actually use it to shape policy where it becomes productive and not destructive? Who wants to take that question first?
All right, I'll go first. I think that, I have found that social media is a really, really important channel for amplifying voices. Yes, there's a backlash, but I've always thought that with everything that's ever been created in the world, there's always something negative you could do with that same channel or that tool. We have used it, and when I say we, the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry and a few other NGOs I belong to, we have used it to coalesce the youth. They are digital natives. They tend to be able to engage through this medium. I'm currently working with a few people on the Lagos Island, at the Lagos Island local government, where we're trying to create that local government into a model local government that the Lagos state government can replicate in its other local governments. The entire program is driven by the youth. It has its employability side, its entrepreneurial side, and its mentoring. And it's based on these 3 building blocks that we have the youth engaging in an extremely positive way around issues of policy. So they actually had their first economic summit in, I think it was October or November last year. And it was a lot more successful than we expected. Government was present at 2 levels, the local government level and the state government level. And they found it extremely valuable. They were engaging in ways that they had never engaged with the youth. The youth themselves gave feedback saying that they found it very educative. They got a better understanding of the role of local government and state governments in their lives, in their businesses. And I frankly think that despite the negativity that we have coming with the channel of social media, I think the good outweighs the bad, and that over time we will find ways of dealing with the negativity, and that should not limit us from using the channel in the best way possible to amplify voices. I think the best thing that I love about it is that it's borderless, so you can engage with communities across the world over issues that you have in common, or over sharing of experiences from which everybody gets value. So yes, I hear you, Ndidi, that there is the negative side, but I think it is so critical and so important to amplifying voices.
Thank you so much. Adron, do you have the same perspective or differing perspective?
I do have a similar one, because I think it can be used in two ways. You can use it to amplify voices, but it could also be a way through which you improve communication. I'll give two examples on both. The issue about amplifying voices has, I don't know, if you see how most of the, so for instance, in Kenya, the whole issue about let us boycott KFC because they do not source from potatoes locally produced, and why aren't they using our market? Or that whole drive started online. It started online. Before you knew it, it was a big deal. And before you knew it, the regulators were thinking, now, what do we do? But it all started online. There are a lot of movements that went on, not just in the agriculture sector, but during COVID, where no one was meeting anyone, still, there were still these drives that were able to be successfully run. So I know that social media is important, definitely can be used negatively, but there is also a possibility that it can be used to push for better policies where they are needed. But it could also be used as a platform for communication. There is a farmers group in Uganda that uses WhatsApp to link each other to markets. So someone can say, I'm leaving this place right now. My car is empty. Does anyone want? It's like an Uber for cars, but they're all running, an Uber for like farmers, but it's all running on WhatsApp, and it is relatively efficient. So it is possible to use social media in different ways, but it can also be successful. It's harder to know when to drive it to that success, but I guess you can see it when it is successful. It can also be used as a platform to say all these statements that are untrue or that are harder to erase unless you've done like a lot of training and all that. But it can also be used to do positive things, to drive the path of policy, to have different interventions, if you wish. I don't think that a lot of, I think it's mostly good. I think it's mostly good.
Thank you. I like that positive spin. Some of us have become very, very careful about what we put on social media. And I was just reflecting on this. My friend Chimamanda Adichie is such a powerful force. And recently she's put out something on social media about the Catholic Church. And she's having people share their experiences because she wants policies to change in how the Catholic Church addresses the needs of the bereaved, especially in southeastern Nigeria. And I applaud her courage, because some of us will not be as courageous in taking on entities as powerful as the Catholic Church. It's a global entity, right? And it's one of the most powerful entities in the world. I'm just putting it out there. But when you have the security and the confidence, you can take on any issue. There are two other questions that have come in I want us to address. Practically, there's a question about skills. What unique skills do you need to bring to your work as change makers, especially women? Elaine has asked this question. I think it's a fantastic question. And then there's another question from Ayotunde about how SMEs can assess the tools and resources that your organization, Adron, offers, especially SMEs in Malawi. So can we take both questions one after the other? Who wants to start with the one on skills? Both of you are women change makers. What skills have you had to build? What skills have you seen other women build?
I think the biggest one has had to be around leadership for me, in getting the buy-in of others into ideas, into taking the lead on things that I think are important and might make a difference. Another skill has had to be around inclusiveness. Sometimes you think you're inclusive and you start to engage with people you ordinarily would not come across in your daily living, and suddenly your perspective on the world absolutely changes because of these new stakeholders you have met. So being inclusive in your thinking can be very difficult, especially if you think you're liberal and that you usually can't take in. So that being inclusive can be tough. I've had to learn to be able to do that. I've had to learn to be a lot more democratic. I thought I was democratic until I started to realize that being democratic is not so much about what you think is right, but what the majority thinks should be done, whether you agree with it or not. There are some skills that I have had to develop around the engagements I have spoken about in terms of developing these coalitions, the kind of workshops that Adron spoke about, analyzing the skills required by these SME leaders, who the trainers will be, how the training is done, the process that needs to be followed to be able to get reform in the sense that laws actually get amended or laws get, bills actually get drafted and passed through the legislature in order to become law, which is a really long process. Sometimes you lose the attention of the stakeholders you represent because they don't want to be bogged down by all of these legalese and the financial and economic issues. What they want to see is action. And being able to work through that process and keep your stakeholders engaged as you go through that process, thinking about low-hanging fruits, quick wins, so that they follow you on that journey. I think that these are some of the most essential skills I really have had to build in this time.
Thank you. I love them. Leadership. I think you also have a lot of humility. I'm going to put that as a skill because it's often, said as women move up in the world, we start losing some of our humility, but you need to have humility and patience in this journey. And you have both, Toki. I think, the collaborative spirit, democratic approach, and also, bringing the unusual voices into the room. I hear you loud and clear. Always thinking whose seat is not represented and how can I make sure their voice is well represented. Really, really important. And if I could put words in your mouth, one of the things that I always hear from women change makers and policymakers is the importance of being behind and making others look like the winners. So, politicians love to look good, make them look good. They don't, nobody needs to know you are the one who did the work. And so that's the ability to share the glory. There's a great quote I love. It's amazing how much we can accomplish if we don't care who gets the credit. And that is often such a powerful tool in this journey. So I've put those words in your mouth as well. And I see you nodding, so I see you agree. Adron, what are your thoughts on this? ideas to build upon before you take the question about SMEs in Malawi?
It's been, for me, I have to say, it's been a long process of growth and finding myself. I don't know how many lawyers you know I specialized in agriculture, but I do not know many. Most of the lawyers I know are in corporate, finance. And the moment I say that I'm specialized in agriculture, I remember one of my uncles said, "So who pays you?" The farmers. But the farmers are poor. And, for me, with getting into this field, it's because I was passionate about it. And it has taken me a long time to get comfortable in my chair, because it's not the normal. It's not the normal that I knew. But I have had to sit back and learn a lot of what I know. It's most of it I didn't learn from school. It's just experience and dealing with people in fields that you don't even know about. Like, I didn't even know existed. I work a lot with breeders, and tomorrow I'm having a meeting with these breeders from Nigeria. I like these people because I know that they are highly accomplished in their fields. Like, to develop one single variety, it takes 20 years. That is a lot. And you have someone who has like 3 or 2 varieties. That's a long time. So having the capacity to stand back and respect that, and knowing that everyone in their field, what you're bringing onto the table is relevant. It is nothing without the one with the technical expertise. So ultimately, I've had to grow a lot, sit and listen, improve in my communication. A lot of it has been behind sitting and listening, like just listen. And sometimes communication can be so hard because sometimes you're working in places where someone does not speak English, or, we worked in Ethiopia, in northern Ethiopia, in a place called Moyale. And even getting there was hard because there are bullets flying all over the place. And and then you get there and they have no idea what you're saying. And if you're not patient, you're just going to walk away with nothing. But it's been a process for me, really. It's been a process. And I think the one thing that I say I've learned is to listen, because I know I talk a lot, but I've learned to just listen. That is one skill I've had to hone over time. Right. And then the issue about SMEs and how they could access these tools. On our New Markets Lab website, we have a lot of these tools readily available. And there is a platform, the digital platform that we are now developing. I hope it can be ready by media. So we are compiling all the research that we've been doing and making it available on this platform. So all the relevant laws of how you navigate different regulatory systems, how do you register a business, how long does it take, how much does it cost, even our upcoming work. So if we're doing a workshop, you will know there is a workshop happening in Malawi. Actually, in March, we're doing a workshop on licensing in Malawi. But yes, most of these works are available on our websites.
Thank you so much. Can you put in the website link in the chat so that people can get to it? But I love what you said, Adron, about patience, about listening, about tenacity. But the one that really struck me is really this concept of mastery. I'm learning more and more as a woman in this space that women like Adron, the fact that you're a lawyer who knows agriculture means that you're 1 in a billion. And you're an expert, you've mastered this. And so people need you, and you have a voice that's credible. So oftentimes people don't want to specialize. They tell me, oh, I don't want to enter agriculture, it's too specialized, right? Many of the staff I try to recruit from law, from business, no, it's too specialized. And I'm like, do you know that right now the world needs more specialists, more experts? And that's what set apart my company, Sahel Consulting. All we do is agriculture and nutrition, and that makes us unique. So I think you've done a great job in developing that mastery, and I think more women need to figure out what are they going to be the best in the world at. so that everybody needs to listen to them because they have a voice and they have expertise that is unmatched. So well done for building that. All right, we're going to take a few more questions. Please put in your questions because we're going to start rounding up. It's Black History Month in North America. It's Black History Month every day in Africa. But since we have a North American audience, and I know McGill is celebrating Black History Month, I wanted to ask you about your views on the future of Africa and the role of Africa in changing mindsets about Black people everywhere. You know, I often tell people that if we can get an act together on the continent, you know, Africans, Black people, people of color will be respected all over the world. I carry that burden every time I walk into the room, right? And I'm just curious, are you optimistic? Are you positive about the future? And what are some encouraging perspectives would you share with the audience today that's, you know, reflecting on the history of the Black race and the challenges we continue to face in the world?
There is a TEDx talk by Chimamanda, and she was saying the effect of having, I can't paraphrase, but I say the effect of having one perspective about someone.
The danger of a single story, yes.
Yes, right. And I think it's important that, you know, I know that there is a lot of hope. I shouldn't even be hope because I've never looked at us as vulnerable, or like I know that we have like the things that we need, but so does everyone else. Like it's usually easier for us to be painted as the ones who need saving, or you know, but I know that there is a lot of capacity, a lot of untapped ability to do a lot of things. And I would say that one of the easiest example is how the youth in Africa are using technology. I'm always amazed by how many apps are out there. Like think about any app, if you look for it online, it's there. And it's because there's all this investment in using technology. I know that there is just a lot of an untapped capacity. As long as we are able to focus on building this capacity and you know, I want to say stopping to portray us as needers, or you know, like we need. I know that I'm trying to make sure that
I hear what you're saying loud and clear. I said even in New Markets Lab, I'm sure the rest of the world is learning from Africa, right? Even in your context, I have a lot of hope. I mean, listening to the ideas you shared, I'm like, this can be applied even in context in Canada, in context in the United States. There are SMEs, there are small businesses who need the same type of mapping and the same type of engagement. So we have so much to teach the world, not just in technology, but even in our systematic approach to doing things. So I think I hear you. There are multiple stories and we have capacity to deliver impact. So thank you for sharing that.
And some of these solutions are here already. I know that, but when I just started at New Markets Lab, I thought, oh, we could get the best practices from India or China. And then it turns out that is not what the stakeholders needed. That they would say that what you proposed is not what we need. We actually need this. So for me, I know that the solutions are here already. It's more of implementing them and making sure that what is actually needed is what is put in place. I don't know whether you've seen this tendency of having copy and pasted laws. Like you read something and you've seen this somewhere. It's exactly the same. And that's because it's just copied and pasted. But if the solutions are already here, we just need to be able to tap them and apply them or implement them in a way that works for us.
Fantastic. The solutions are here, we just need to implement them. Thank you. Toki, what are your thoughts on this issue as we round up?
Well, my thoughts are that Africa is the last frontier, right? And that the way the world is developing, technology is going to take us places. The limitation, the only limitation I actually have always seen all of my life is the fact that we haven't learned to amplify our voice, tell our stories, you know, and let the world see Africa for what it is. And so I find that when anyone from the West or from what is called the developed world actually gets to visit Africa and see Africa for what it is, they feel really special and that they've had a very special experience. And that's really because Africa is a very special place. So I think our time is coming. I think we just need to focus on understanding who we are, understanding our capacity, understanding our purpose on earth and why we're here, and reclaiming our own. That's what I think it is. We've run around in circles for decades, you know. I think we need to stop doing that and get serious. But I want to be like Adrian. I don't want to use the word hopeful at all. I just think that there's no other place to go. Africa is on the rise. It is, and I think we will get there pretty soon. The world has a lot to gain from Africa. And I think there are a lot of people who know that already. And we're under siege. Have you noticed that we're under siege? So I think we need to get serious about, you know, what we're going to accept and what we're not going to accept.
And just to clarify, under siege, meaning plane loads of people coming into the continent to take advantage of the land, the resources,
meaning the Berlin Conference starting all over again, but it's not about land.
Exactly. And I just want to you know, underscore Elaine's point. She also believes that a paradigm shift is needed, especially in the agricultural landscape, because we are naturally endowed for agricultural excellence. Elaine is speaking my language. Africa can feed the rest of the world when it comes to food. And it's just about the right investments, engagement of the right partners, entrepreneurs, and understanding our power, our collective power. And that's why this concept of policy is so important. People coming together to shape the future and to create the future they deserve. That's really, really important. So at this point, I just want to thank our speakers. I have gained so much from listening to both of you. It would be tough to summarize it. I'm going to ask our participants to just drop in their key takeaways in the chat. One new thing you've learned, one new idea that has popped up, one new message that you've gotten. For me, I've gotten some very fundamental messages. The first is there's power in numbers. There's power in coalitions, there's power in research, in M&E, in data. There's power in having a position paper and understanding what your position is and being able to sell your position using data, using language that the policymakers understand. There's a power in communication, bringing all the unusual stakeholders together and even having them speak to each other and understand where the problem lies and how to create win-win solutions. You know, that was really what I got from Toki's message, and it's possible, it's happening, it needs to happen more, and we need to be systematic about how we do it. And from Adron, we learned about, you know, how critical it is actually to document these maps, to actually see the relationships, the complexity, the bottlenecks, to lay them out, to have stakeholders agree and understand where those bottlenecks are, and to map out solutions and collectively develop a systematic approach. The concept of local ownership, engaging those local lawyers, building the capacity of the local lawyers, ensuring that, you know, gradually the wins are able to sustain the investment in the advocacy and the sustained investment in M&E, and the learnings across Africa and the importance of cross-learning and ownership and community engagement. I just love all of those examples. And then finally, as we talked about youth and women, the future is youth, the future is women, the future is Africa. And I can't summarize it any further. This has been phenomenal. I really want to thank Toki, Mabogunje, thank you, Adron. Thank you for your fantastic presentations. Thank you for the insights you shared. We're going to definitely share this widely. And I want to thank the Maxwell team. Thank you, Catherine, for your support. Thank you to all our different partners for giving us this forum. And please enjoy the rest of your evening. And good night to my sisters in Nigeria and in Africa. And enjoy the rest of your evening to the rest of you.
Good night, Ndidi.
God bless
Good night,
you all.
everyone.
Take
Thank you very
care.
much for being here.
Bye.
Thank you,
Thanks so
everyone.
much.
Bye.